On April 21, 2016, the gates of Paisley Park turned into the gates of mourning. Prince, the genius who redefined music with Purple Rain, 1999, and a stage presence that seemed untouchable, was suddenly gone. Found alone in an elevator inside his own home, the official word was simple: accidental overdose. But nothing about Prince was ever simple. Fans asked, how could a man so disciplined, so private, and so committed to his health fall into such a trap? His death report left more questions than answers, and for years rumors swirled about shady pills, hidden pain, and people who may have known more than they admitted. What investigators uncovered behind those walls was darker than anyone imagined. The mystery surrounding Prince's death has finally been unraveled. But the truth isn't a fairy tale. It's a nightmare, and it changes how we see his final days forever. In the weeks leading up to his death, Prince's world looked like a contradiction. To the public, he was still the electrifying performer, appearing on stage in dazzling outfits, bathed in purple light, delivering music that shook the walls of sold-out arenas. But behind those performances was a man who was visibly struggling. Fans whispered that he looked frailer, thinner, and at times unsteady. On April 14, 2016, he performed in Atlanta in what would be his final concert, a show that ended with a rare piano-only encore of Purple Rain. Those lucky enough to be there remembered it as ethereal, almost like a farewell, though no one knew it then. The very next day, the cracks became impossible to hide. Prince's private jet made an emergency landing in Moline, Illinois, after he was found unresponsive mid-flight. Authorities later confirmed he was revived with naloxone, a drug used to reverse opioid overdoses. Still, Prince brushed it off publicly, telling fans at a Paisley Park dance party, "Wait a few days before you waste your prayers." His words sounded like defiance, but in truth, they were a mask. He was desperate to keep the world from seeing the depth of his struggle. Friends noticed he seemed exhausted, yet he insisted on pushing forward, rehearsing, recording, and hosting parties at Paisley Park. He would ride his bike, play basketball, and even attend church services in those final days, all while hiding a storm inside. Prince had always been a man of mystery, guarding his private life as fiercely as his music. But in the days before his death, the secrecy wasn't about privacy. It was about survival. He knew his body was failing, but he couldn't admit weakness. He couldn't allow the image of invincibility to break. It was this silence, this refusal to reveal his pain, that sealed the fate of the legend who seemed larger than life, but was, in reality, living on borrowed time. Prince was more than a performer. He was a force of nature, a man who demanded perfection from himself and from everyone around him. For decades, he leapt across stages in high heels, danced with wild energy, and played marathon guitar solos that pushed his body to the limit. But what the audience never saw was the price. By the early 2000s, Prince was quietly suffering from crippling hip pain. Years of acrobatic performances had worn his body down. Doctors urged him to undergo double hip replacement surgery. But Prince was a devout Jehovah's Witness, and his faith strongly discouraged blood transfusions, a standard part of such operations. Instead of surgery, he turned to holistic remedies, physical therapy, and eventually powerful painkillers. Friends recalled seeing him walk with a cane, not as a fashion statement, but as a necessity. He often masked the pain with layers of energy on stage, but when the lights went down, he struggled even to move. Insiders described nights where he could barely get out of bed, where rehearsals ended early because the pain was unbearable. Yet Prince was never the type to confess weakness. He refused to let anyone outside his closest circle know just how much he was hurting. Even to friends, he would dismiss it, insisting he was fine, brushing off concerns. But pain is relentless. Pain demands relief. And when natural methods failed, Prince turned to stronger substances, opening a door he could never close again. This was the beginning of a dangerous reliance, one hidden from fans, hidden from the press, and even hidden from many who worked closely with him. The pain that no one saw became the silent partner to his genius, a constant weight that pushed him deeper into secrecy and closer to the tragedy that would eventually take his life. For years, Prince was celebrated as one of the cleanest living icons in music. While many of his peers drowned in alcohol or lost themselves to hard drugs, Prince seemed untouchable. He was a vegetarian, he rarely drank, and he spoke openly about keeping his body pure. To the outside world, he was proof that genius didn't need chemical fuel. But behind the walls of Paisley Park, a different story was unfolding. As his hip pain grew worse, doctors prescribed opioids, powerful pills meant to dull agony that no therapy could touch. At first, it was small doses, enough to take the edge off and let him keep performing. But pain is a predator, and opioids are its perfect accomplice. Over time, his reliance deepened. Pills became part of his daily routine, hidden in unmarked bottles, sometimes disguised as ordinary prescriptions. He never wanted fans to know, and he certainly didn't want the press to see him as weak. Even close friends said he would go to great lengths to cover it up. He would arrive at rehearsals full of energy, but when the cameras stopped rolling, his mood could change in an instant. His staff noticed the secrecy, the locked drawers, the sudden disappearances, the excuses that never quite added up. Still, no one dared confront him directly. Prince was a perfectionist, a man who demanded loyalty, and to question him was to risk being cut out of his inner circle forever. Those who loved him the most saw the warning signs, but didn't know how to break through his wall of silence. He insisted he was in control, but by 2015 it was clear the pills were controlling him. He was getting them from multiple sources, some legitimate, others far less so. Investigators would later learn that many of the pills Prince believed to be regular painkillers were actually laced with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times stronger than heroin. But in those final months, he had no idea. He thought he was managing his pain. In reality, the very cure he believed was saving him was slowly poisoning him, setting the stage for the darkest chapter of his life. April 20th, 2016 seemed like any other night at Paisley Park, but for Prince it was a final descent into silence. He had spent the previous days moving between moments of activity and long stretches of solitude. Staff members described him as restless, pacing through the vast complex, sometimes retreating to his recording studio, where the lights burned deep into the night. To the outside world, he was still functioning, even visiting his local Walgreens pharmacy several times that week. Surveillance footage later showed him walking the aisles, appearing tired but composed, no sign of the storm raging inside his body. That night, witnesses reported he kept mostly to himself, locking his doors earlier than usual. Some friends had tried to reach him by phone, but he didn't answer. The walls of Paisley Park, once filled with laughter, music, and endless rehearsals, were instead wrapped in an eerie quiet. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, Prince took what he believed were prescription painkillers, unaware that many of the pills were counterfeit and laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl. The timeline of those last hours remains haunting. At around 6 a.m., his staff arrived at the compound but didn't see him right away. His schedule had been light, so at first there was no alarm. But by mid-morning, concern grew when no one had heard from him. Around 9:43 a.m., his longtime assistant discovered him collapsed in the elevator of his home. His body was lifeless, his signature style of dress still intact, but his skin pale. First responders were called immediately, and emergency crews rushed to revive him. But it was too late. At 10:07 a.m., Prince, the man who had defied every label, every trend, every attempt to box him in, was declared dead at just 57 years old. The image of his body being wheeled out of Paisley Park remains one of the most chilling reminders that even the greatest among us are not invincible. Fans gathered outside the gates, sobbing, holding purple balloons, singing Purple Rain in unison, unable to grasp the reality. But inside the compound, investigators were already piecing together a more sinister puzzle. The question wasn't just how Prince died, it was who or what put those deadly pills in his hands, and why no one had stopped it sooner. When the medical examiner released the findings, the world was stunned, but the details told a story more disturbing than anyone expected. Prince Rogers Nelson, age 57, had died from an accidental overdose of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid so powerful that even a few grains can kill. The autopsy revealed no alcohol in his system, no street drugs like cocaine or heroin, only the presence of fentanyl at levels far beyond what the human body could endure. But the most haunting discovery was this: none of the medications found at Paisley Park were prescribed in his name. Bottles were labeled under aliases, written for people close to him, a clear attempt to keep his dependency hidden from public view. Among the pills recovered were counterfeit versions of Vicodin, white tablets stamped to look legitimate, but secretly laced with lethal doses of fentanyl. To investigators, this raised alarming questions. Did Prince know he was taking counterfeit pills? Or had he trusted sources who assured him they were safe? Toxicology tests confirmed that the dose he ingested was astronomical, enough to stop his breathing within minutes. The medical examiner also noted that Prince's body showed signs of long-term opioid use, his organs bearing the scars of a man who had been quietly fighting a battle for years. Yet despite this, there were no syringes, no evidence of traditional drug abuse, only pills. Hundreds of them, tucked away in hiding spots throughout Paisley Park. Drawers, backpacks, and even prescription bottles hidden inside other containers revealed the lengths Prince had gone to maintain his secrecy. The autopsy files closed the door on rumors of suicide or foul play, but they opened a darker truth. Prince had become another victim of the opioid epidemic sweeping America. His death was not a deliberate act, but a tragic collision between pain, dependency, and poisoned pills. Fans who had once believed their idol was untouchable now had to face the reality that even the most disciplined, spiritually devoted artist could be undone by something as small as a counterfeit tablet. And yet, even as the facts seemed clear, the lack of accountability left an echoing void. Someone had put those deadly pills into circulation, and Prince had paid the ultimate price. In the days after Prince's death, investigators swarmed Paisley Park. What they found was not the palace of perfection fans imagined, but a labyrinth of secrets. Dozens of pill bottles, many unlabeled, were scattered in drawers, purses, and even tucked away in guitar cases. Some bore the names of associates, not Prince himself, a tactic to shield him from suspicion if authorities ever asked questions. The DEA and local sheriff's department launched a full-scale investigation, tracing the origin of the counterfeit pills that had killed him. But quickly, the search hit walls. Witnesses were evasive, doctors denied wrongdoing, and Prince's most trusted staff claimed ignorance. It was as though everyone had been aware of the problem, yet no one had the courage to confront it. Even when investigators discovered that Dr. Michael Schulenberg, a local physician, had written prescriptions for Prince under the name of his bodyguard, they could not tie him directly to the fentanyl-laced pills that ended the star's life. Schulenberg eventually paid a $30,000 settlement for improper prescribing practices, but was never charged in connection with the death itself. Federal agents also tracked down drug rings in Minnesota, probing whether counterfeit pills had been funneled into Prince's circle. Still, no arrests were ever made. To many fans, this looked less like an investigation and more like a cover-up. How could the trail simply vanish when a global superstar had been killed by illegal fentanyl? Rumors spread that powerful figures wanted the case closed quickly, to protect reputations and shield Prince's inner circle from exposure. Even more suspicious was the silence of those closest to him. His family rarely spoke publicly about the details, and Paisley Park staff deflected reporters' questions, claiming they were as shocked as anyone. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Prince was surrounded by people who knew he was in trouble, who watched him walk into pharmacies again and again, who saw the signs of dependency and the mounting risk, and still no one intervened. The official word was that the source of the counterfeit pills could not be identified, and with no clear suspect, prosecutors announced in 2018 that the case was closed. No charges, no accountability, just a dead legend and an empty explanation. For fans, it felt like betrayal, the realization that Prince had been failed not just by the system, but by the people who should have protected him most. When Prince died, he left behind not only a musical empire, but also a fortune estimated at more than $156 million, and the battle for that fortune revealed fractures within his family that mirrored the secrecy of his final years. Prince had no will, no clear plan for who would inherit his estate, and as a result, the courts were forced to sift through a web of half-siblings, distant relatives, and opportunists who claimed ties to his bloodline. For years, the estate was trapped in legal limbo, its value shrinking under the weight of legal fees, disputes, and drawn-out negotiations. The family who once presented a united front in mourning quickly splintered, some fighting for control, others retreating into silence. While fans gathered outside Paisley Park to sing his songs, inside the courtrooms the arguments were cold, bitter, and relentless. At the same time, Paisley Park itself was transformed into a museum, a pilgrimage site for grieving fans. To many it felt like commercialization, turning his sanctuary into a business, while deeper questions about his death remained unanswered. Why were there no public calls for accountability from his family? Why did those closest to him remain so quiet about the circumstances that led to his overdose? Some insiders claimed that the family feared what might surface if they pushed too hard, that Prince's legacy could be tarnished by an image of addiction and secrecy. Others whispered that silence was a form of protection, shielding certain figures from legal or financial ruin. Whatever the reason, the effect was the same. The mystery of Prince's final days was buried beneath court filings and estate appraisals. Even as the estate was finally settled years later, the sense of closure never came. Instead, fans were left with the image of a man whose family could not protect him in life and could not unite in death. For all his brilliance, Prince had lived and died on his own terms, but the silence of those who survived him suggested a truth too painful to confront: that money and image had taken priority over exposing the forces that had led him to his fate. Prince was more than a musician. He was a revolution contained within one man, a genius who fused funk, rock, soul, and pop into something so original that it created an entirely new language of music. He challenged the industry, defied labels, fought for artists' rights, and redefined what it meant to be a star. For decades, fans believed he was indestructible, a force beyond the reach of ordinary tragedy. But his death revealed a far darker truth, that even the greatest among us are not immune to the shadows that lurk behind fame. His passing was not just the loss of a singular talent, but the exposure of a crisis hiding in plain sight. Prince was not alone in his struggle. He became one of tens of thousands of Americans claimed by fentanyl each year. Victims of counterfeit pills disguised as relief, but delivering only death. His story showed how pain, secrecy, and a broken system could conspire to destroy even the most disciplined artist. He had the wealth to buy the best care, the fame to command loyalty, the intelligence to outthink most men, and still he could not escape. That is the unsettling truth, that this epidemic reaches into every corner of society, swallowing the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, the legends and the unknowns. Prince's death, stripped of the glamour and mythology, was the same as countless others who believed they were taking medicine only to be betrayed by poison. And yet his case was different in one crucial way. The world was watching. Millions mourned, but millions also asked why no one was held accountable, why investigations ended with silence, why his family did not demand justice. The answers remain murky, but the effect is undeniable. His death stands as a symbol not only of the dangers of addiction, but of the failure to protect those who fall into it, even when warning signs are everywhere. Still, in the middle of tragedy, Prince's music lives on. Every time Purple Rain echoes through a stadium, every time Kiss sends crowds to the dance floor, every time When Doves Cry spills from a radio, his genius breathes again. He left behind not just an estate, but a soundtrack for generations. Proof that brilliance can survive even the darkest ending. But his legacy carries with it a warning. Behind the glamour, the fame, the stage lights, there was a man in pain. A man who hid his suffering to maintain an image. A man whose silence cost him everything. The mystery of his death has been solved, but the answer is not comforting. It is a reminder that genius does not grant immunity, that even legends can be undone by secrecy, and that the opioid crisis is not a faceless epidemic. It wears the faces of icons, neighbors, and family members alike. Prince's death was a tragedy, but it was also a mirror held up to society, forcing us to confront a reality many would rather ignore. His music told us to celebrate life, to break free of chains, to live without compromise. Yet his final chapter revealed the opposite, a cautionary tale of what happens when pain is hidden, when truth is buried, and when accountability is erased. The purple lights that bathed his stages are gone, but the questions remain, echoing louder than ever. In the end, Prince's story is not only about genius and glory. It is about fragility, about the price of silence, and about the haunting truth that the very things he sought to escape, pain, secrecy, control, were the very things that finally claimed him. And that truth, as much as it hurts, will forever be part of his legacy.